Hello, everybody. We are going to kick off. Sorry, we're starting a little bit late. We are a more intimate crowd tonight, as often happens in winter. So if you want to come close to the front, you are very welcome. If you're happy where you are, you're also very welcome to stay where you are. If you haven't been before, my name is Michaela Kalowski, and this is Readers, Books and Conversation, our monthly book conversation at the wonderful Petersham Bowling Club. If it's your local, welcome back. It's delightful for us to be with you, really. I wanted to let you know that this edition, this evening, you are in for what I would describe as a heart, mind and laughter treat, because Cadance Bell is in the house. She shares and shapes stories, hers and other people's, for many different mediums, as you'll hear about tonight. She's the author of memoir, of science fiction, which is a new audiobook, of new fiction that she's writing, of screenplays. She's a creative consultant, a creative powerhouse, and I'm going to tell you a bit more about her before we get going and her wide-ranging and exciting collection of work that she does. I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet on tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm going to speak to Cadance in the usual way of 45 minutes, and then we'd love to hear from you at the end. I promise after you hear Cadance Bell speak, you will have questions. And Hayley will bring a microphone around and we can hear more. You will have seen the lovely table of books up the front. The book you can buy tonight is this extraordinary memoir, which I think has the best name of any memoir, The All of It, A Bogan Rhapsody. And that's for sale on the beautiful table there from Berkeley Books in Leichhardt. And if you aren't already a subscriber to Audible, you can do a free subscription, because you will want to hear Letters to Our Robot Son, which is the audiobook that Cadance Bell wrote that went straight to Audible. It's an Audible exclusive, and is absolutely exceptional. You won't be able to not binge that work of science fiction, and we will talk about it tonight as well. We are going to travel across a wide array of ideas and conversations tonight and topics. I'm going to invite Cadance to riff about creativity, how creativity works, the reality of making art in Australia, and why it matters that we read and that she creates stories that take place in Australia as well, and her views on how art can be a place where all of us, with our differences across culture, gender, age and lived experience, can meet and exchange and learn and party. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Cadance Bell, and then we're going to get going. Cadance Bell is an Australian author, showrunner, producer, director and writer. Her memoir, The All of It, A Bogan Rhapsody, was published by Penguin in July 2022 to critical acclaim and was shortlisted for the Age Book of the Year. She's currently writing Monster St James, a neo-noir love letter to Sydney, and a follow-up memoir. Between writing as a showrunner and a screenwriter, she's also currently working on numerous scripted television projects and developing a feature film. Her prior documentary films include The Rainbow Passage for Network 10 and Screen Australia, and Who Am I?, the world's first documentary exploring the intersection of gender diversity and autism. She is the founder of 3Key, which seeks to promote mindful kindness, and the annual Rainbow Day, which has raised almost $1 million for charitable causes. Her mission is to unmake prejudice, which I love. A beautiful phrase. Cadance Bell, yeah. By encouraging audiences to know LGBTQIA plus stories, and she was the first transgender person to become a champion of Women's Health Week. Her first fiction, which I just mentioned, Letters to Our Robot Son, is a modern science fiction epic. It's exclusively on Audible. For now, we're going to talk about that as well. It's an unexpected story of life, family, hope and redemption at the end of the world. She's been praised by people as a narrative alchemist, a mercurial genius and a fearless imaginer whose bold ideas fizz off the page with spry wit and distinct rhythm. Please join me in making Cadance Bell very welcome at the Petersham Bowling Club.
Thank you, gang. It's great to be here.
Cadance, I wanted to go back to the beginning, and you do write about some of this in your wonderful memoir, but I wanted to ask you what the first memory was that you have of the first story you dreamed up or wrote down. What was it?
Oh, that I dreamed up? Oh, my goodness. See, I've heard this question before, but it was, what was the first story that I saw?
Yeah.
That I really appreciated, and that was James Cameron's The Abyss. That's the one that really
I feel like that explains a lot about you.
I know. I try to tell people that. Just check out the movie, you'll get me.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I've had so many stories over the years that I'm not so sure that I could pin them, but there is one that stands out, and it was called Merrin's Gift, and it was about a girl that could see the future, And it more or less became the television show Heroes.
Okay.
So eventually that story came to the screen, and I gave up on writing it. But I was obsessed with that one when I was a teenager, and I always thought that was going to be the story that would get published and that would make it. It took another 20 years before I would actually get published.
Yeah.
But I think that was the first story that I ever lost myself into. I think that for me, the characters and the situations of my stories, they tend to haunt me. If I don't at least make an attempt to get them out of my mind, to get them out of my heart, they will follow me everywhere I go. And sadly, that is one that's dropped off, but I think that was the very first. It was Merrin's Gift, it was called.
I love that name. It's interesting that, you describe Merrin's Gift and you talk about James Cameron's The Abyss. So there's an interest straight off the bat in this kind of futuristic or dystopian or science fiction. What do you think it was that about that style of storytelling that kind of clicked for you?
Humanity. I love science fiction. It's my favourite genre, but I like warm science fiction. I like science fiction with heart. And if we're talking about the Abyss, it was just so human and so flawed, and the characters were so enriched. I remember watching it with my auntie. At the time she was pregnant, and I was trying to get as much of her as I could, because once the baby came, I wouldn't be able to spend much time with my auntie anymore. And so she was bored out of her brain. She's like, screw it, we're just going to put on this movie. And there's a moment, if you've seen the film, where they swim underneath the water from one hatch of a submersible to another. And she said to me, see if you can hold your breath as long as they do. And they held their breath for about 45 seconds or something. And that memory is a core memory of mine, I think. It's just me going for 45 seconds. I couldn't do it.
I love it.
But I saw the film again for the first time in about 12 years. They had a screening of it in December. It's now available on iTunes. Highly recommend getting it. But I saw a screening at Palace Cinemas here in Sydney, and I had a friend with me who'd never seen it, and so I leant across to her and I said, see if you can hold your breath as long as they do. So it was like a complete full circle moment for me. Here I was telling my own stories, making my own shows, making my own movies, and I was telling it to somebody else.
I love it. Could she?
Nope.
No, no one can.
She had no idea.
I think that's our challenge tonight when we go home.
Yes.
When we think about where you grew up, you mostly grew up in Mudgee.
Yeah.
What were the expectations of where and when you grew up? I'm sort of wondering about, were there people who had hopes for you, and what were those hopes? Were there people around you who became writers? Was that something that you thought could be on offer to you?
No, I don't think so. My mum was a huge reader. She always had her head stuck in a book. And I think that's where my love of story came from. I have the faintest of memories of her reading me Dr. Seuss when I was very, very little. A lot of those classics, Clifford the Big Red Dog, Harry McClary from Donaldson's Dairy, right on. The classics never age, right? And I think that it was the phonetics of it, and it was the passion. That was the first time I think that I realised that words weren't just words. They weren't just the things that appear on signs. They weren't just the things that appear in the newspaper. Words actually had not just meaning, but feeling behind them. And I think that that's ultimately what drew me to storytelling. We just had so many stories around the house. Mum mainly had her stick books, as Dad called them. They were all just erotica, so they didn't appeal to me so much.
Stick books?
Stick books, Dad would call them, yeah.
Okay.
I'll explain why when you're older.
Yes, thank you.
And I think that was it. I think it was seeing the passion and seeing the love and the fantasy. That's what drew me to storytelling in the first instance. Yeah.
You detail a couple of really important teachers who saw your talent and who reflected your gifts back to you. What did they notice? And I guess I'm wondering, were you aware then that you had the voice of an author, that were stories that you were going to tell us?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm one of those kids that said, when I grow up, I am going to, and then did. I have not... Well, it's not true. I have wavered from time to time. There are times when I thought I was going to give up, but I cannot imagine doing anything else with my life. I've only very recently, in the last couple of years, made the decision to do it full time, because I think you have to be a little bit crazy to be an artist, to be a storyteller, to make it in this world, just bringing fantasy into the world where we have so many more pressing concerns. You know, we've got housing, and Mum always wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor or something honest, just not a politician, she would say. And so I think that, I think that you really do have to be just that little bit crazy to be able to persevere. When I was a teenager, we had an ABC bookshop. It was on the corner of a street in Mudgee, very, very prominent store. And they would always have authors come in. And I was the nerd that was always, who's coming in this week? You know, who you got this week? And Peter Watt, he's an Australian historical fiction writer. He came in, and I would always ask the authors, how do you do it? How do you get from A to B? How do I get to be where you are? And he wrote in a book that he gifted me had a different name at the time, but let's just say Cadance, with the only word an author ever needs to know: persevere. And I think that is probably, to this day, if not the best advice I've received, the most relevant and the most significant for this journey. You really do have to believe in it enough that you won't give up, and that you'll just keep coming back to the keyboard, and that you'll keep coming back to the bookshops, and that you'll just keep going. So yeah.
And as we're going to talk about tonight, there are so many things you write and you create in so many different mediums and forms and styles. But the first thing that really came out into the world was the memoir. And I wanted the memoir, for people who haven't read it, it's hilarious, it's poignant, it has Cadance's voice. It's a very particular style. They're kind of small vignettes about where she grew up, and they kind of build and connect with one another until you get this real sort of crescendo of experience of the things that you lived and survived. And I wanted to ask you what it felt like to put that all out into the world, and what sort of response you got to it.
Yeah, look, that is such a great question. And I would just put a quick caveat at the beginning that it really wasn't the first story that I put out into the world. I made a lot of films, short films, music videos, TV commercials, a couple of documentaries. When I made the decision to transition genders, I didn't want to pollute who I was going to become with who I was. And so one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life and in my career was erase all of that and have next to no mention of it. There's just a handful of things that I still absolutely adore to this day. There's still stuff floating around on YouTube, and if you look hard enough, you can find them. But so I did reset my life, and this was significant because it was kind of me coming out again as a storyteller. It was me saying, okay, this is what I've taken from these decades. This is who I am now. This is who I'm going to be. And so it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. One of the things that I told myself when I was writing it was that I would not write it for catharsis, that I would be absolutely brutal, that I wouldn't try to make myself feel good in the writing of the book, that I wouldn't try to solve any of my problems. And I think that was a little bit naive, because there was a delayed reaction, I think, to the process of writing the book, but also releasing it in many ways was more difficult, because when you write a memoir, you are holding your heart out to the world. You are saying, this is who I am, this is who I've been, judge me. And so what comes with that is a whole cavalcade of opinions and thoughts and ideas, and in many ways it's not the people that dislike the book, it's the people that like it but perhaps missed or have strange interpretations and and have strange expectations, you do try to hold all of those for a reader, and you do try to be that version, but it does feel a little bit like you're diluting your existence every time that somebody tells you who they think you are. I finished writing it about a week before my dad died, and so I had the surreal experience that when it came out, and so many people read it, they would come up to me and say, oh my goodness, I really feel like I knew your father, and I really feel like, and the truth was, I'm not sure that I knew him. And so that was particularly surreal to be going through that grieving process. I swear when you lose a parent, you should get 18 months paid insanity leave because it just decimates you. And here I was putting my heart out into the world whilst I was also reconciling the person that in many ways held our family together. Suddenly he was gone and our family was falling apart. So it was a surreal experience, I think. But try to tell a memoirist this before they write the book. Yeah. Try to tell them of all they'll do it anyway. Yeah. I think we, as I said, we're a little bit crazy.
I think it's such a fascinating genre. I mean, you touched a little bit on the weirdness of the memoir genre, you know, that there are people really playing with it now. We had Robin Davidson here at the end of last year, and she talks about writing a memoir and how she didn't want to write the I. So I'm not interested in the I. It's like, how do you write a memoir when you don't want the I, you know? And I wondered when you were thinking about memoir, and I love the structure of this memoir, whether you had a sense before you wrote it of what you wanted it to be, of the kind of form you wanted it to take.
Very much so. I wanted it to be exactly what it is in this moment that we're all experiencing. I wanted it to be a conversation at a pub. I wanted it to be something so simple that people that wouldn't ordinarily want to engage with, you know, transgender stuff, that wouldn't want to engage with rural stuff, that wouldn't want to engage with some of the more serious topics in the book. I wanted it to be highly accessible to those people and not beat them over the head with messaging, and not make them feel dumb or make them feel less in any way, but to demote myself and to try not to be too holier than thou, I think, which once you start transitioning, once you start, you get this huge zest because all the things you suppressed your entire life and all the stuff you shoved into a box, suddenly you can party, you can just go nuts. And so I very much didn't want to write anything that came across as too preachy or anything like that. I wanted it to be like a conversation at a pub. And I do think that I achieved that with this book.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And the joy, I hadn't heard you say that before, that, you know, that there's suddenly all this zest, this enthusiasm that you can kind of tell. I mean, I talked about the party, being with you is like being in a party. And that's interesting that that's the quality that comes across in the writing. Even when you're writing about stuff that's shameful or that's painful, there's this kind of like, you know, desire to emerge and this desire to live. And it runs through all of Cadance's work. As I said, though, in my introduction, I want to keep moving us through your work. You've created stories across so many different mediums. And I wondered if you see a distinction between the mediums. I mean, I think, you know, I have a sense of what the answer is. Like, when some people come up with a story, they go, well, that's clearly a short story. And they come up with something else and they go, well, that's a series. And they come up with something else and they go, actually, that's a screenplay and someone else is going to have to write that because I don't write screenplays. When an idea comes to you or a series of characters come to you, is it clear to you what form they should be in? How do you move between those forms as a writer and as a creative?
No. When the characters come to me, they come as ghosts. And more than anything, I become incredibly inquisitive. Like, why are you here? What are you trying to tell me? Why am I picturing you? Because I tend to map everything around feelings in the first instance. So it often doesn't make sense. My first draft of things can frustrate the living hell out of people because it tends to just chase the emotion without chasing the logic. And that's what's most important to me, I think, is trying to figure out this person that seems to be riding my shoulders, what do they want? Why are they feeling this? What's going on in their life? And so I think once I start answering those questions, that's when things like genre and medium start pouring out. But I like to say I don't do genre, I do story. Now, we obviously have to pick genres because it's more for marketing, I think, than it is for the artists. But in the beginning, there is no attachment. There is no format. There's no medium. There's certainly no genre. There is simply trying to figure out who are these people? Why are they here? Why are they tickling my soul? And that's my process. And then as that goes on, it becomes clearer.
Let's go into one of them. Let's talk about Letters to Our Robot Son, which is beautiful. It is really like nothing else. It's like nothing else. And I love fantasy and I love science fiction in particular. But it's funny, it's epic in scope, it's electrifying, it's fast-paced. It's about a robot called Arto who wakes in a world which is bereft of human life. And Arto has no memory and moves through the world trying to make sense of everything in the world, fearing that they might be the only sentient being left on the entire planet. And one review referred to it as being an intergalactic love letter to found families, which I thought was a beautiful description. Where the heck did this wonderful epic tale come from for you?
Okay, so this is year 19 for me, working on. This is a series, so there are more books to come. I call it the Heart Saga, and this will be my 19th year working on it.
Wow! So
that's
why it's epic.
That is why it's epic.
That makes sense now.
This particular book actually originally started as 3 books, and slowly got smushed into one. And then I started expanding the world and what I wanted to do with it. And because I really do like moving across mediums, I have stories coming in other formats that are still in the world, even a card game that I would love to release in a couple of years. And I couldn't tell you anymore actually where it began because I think it was so long ago. But it did have a lot to do, I think, with family. As you said, found family is such a huge theme in the book. It's a huge theme in all of my work these days, I think. And I think that's probably where it began. For readers of my memoir, you will come to know that for as much fun and as bogany as my family is, that they are wild. You know, I've got bank robber relatives. You know, I've got Daryl Hare, the cricket umpire, was my cousin. We have, and he was.
He had a couple of scandals there.
He did, yeah.
Yeah. There was ball tampering, and then there was embezzlement. You know, it's like
that's right.
It's good to stretch things around. I think that's an incredible chapter in Cadance's memoir. Where you're like, and that member of the family. And that also that member of the family.
I just found out actually that an old relative of mine started a church outside of Cara. So I've got to dig into that one.
Okay.
Because that one's fascinating. So I think coming from such an unstable household and coming from such a wild family, I think that the way that I've always viewed family has been tainted. It's been really, really distorted. And one of the things that once you go from being ostensibly a straight cisgendered person to here I was transgender, I've got a girlfriend, like what does that even mean for me? It suddenly here I was queer, and I had never really thought of myself as having any labels at all. And I think that's when found family became that much more important, and that's one of the reasons why I think I realised that now is the time to tell this story because of all of my experiences with transitioning and also finding the most incredible, amazing people, the most beautiful souls. We all share something. We all have that hardship. And the one thing that we all have in common is the power of found families. So I think that's what drew me to the story now, apart from, of course, artificial intelligence. Yes. I have a lot to say about AI and not just as it exists today and all the dangers of it. I have a lot of fears about what it is that we are creating in the future in terms of intelligences. And so those are the two forces that ultimately led me to writing the book. But as for its actual genesis, to be honest, I think I've forgotten, which is delightful to think about.
It's like it's always existed, yeah. And Arto is just such a beautiful character, sort of a kind of a naive character who's also questioning their own what do I have legs for? I wonder what goes on inside me, because Ardo can't remember anything about, where they've come from. I wanted to ask you why it's an audiobook. I mean, it could have been anything. And I should say it's narrated by Stig Wemus, who many people might know is a very highly regarded and very highly awarded audiobook narrator, whose performance is astounding. It's funny. It sounds like someone doing a theatre show or stand-up for 11 and a half hours. It's an extraordinary feat of performance. And you don't ever go, oh, that's too much, I need to switch it off. You just keep leaning in. How did you get Stig involved, and how did you work with Stig to bring this character, this story to life with such detail and kind of vividness?
I got so lucky to land Stig for this. He narrated Boy Swallow's Universe, so that's the big serious novel over here, but he's also done Andy Griffith's, all the bum stories and treehouse stories and all this sort of jazz.
Yeah.
So he has this astonishing range. He could go from really somber and serious to silly and upbeat at the drop of a hat. And when we were casting, the one thing that I because I didn't really care about what gender the voice was. I didn't care about what nationality it was, because for a time we were thinking of casting an American voice, which would have been wrong because it's such an Australian book.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, the only thing that I really wanted was authenticity from the narrator. I wanted that passion, and I wanted... Because science fiction, I think, can be ridiculed very, very easily, or it can slip in a little bit closer to the fantasy side of things. But I really wanted that authentic voice, somebody who took the material and even all the silly stuff in it, all the serious stuff in it, and considered it all equally. And that's what Stig was able to do. He's so flexible. I wish I could have spent more time with him to finesse it, but he was expensive. And so, so it was really a matter of trying to capture the essence of the story and the most important aspects of it in terms of how should this character sound in terms of their earnestness, I think. Earnest is probably the takeaway from it, because I didn't want any of the characters to feel like they hadn't earned a place in the story, or that they weren't, or that they were just superfluous to the story. And the only way to really make that work is for each and every character to believe the life and death of their essence, to actually never yield, to just be constantly earnest. And Stig was able to do that with very little from me. I wish I could claim more credit for it.
Oh, okay.
But I gave him a couple of pages of notes, a couple of pronunciations for things. Didn't even have a chat with him beforehand. Suddenly there it was in my inbox one day. I cried. I just couldn't believe how incredible it was, especially because whilst I was writing the book, I was recording it and listening to it back. And so I would do it at about twice the speed as Stig, and none of the enthusiasm. It just didn't have the passion that he was able to bring. So I actually narrated the audiobook for all of it, and that has really opened my mind as to what it takes to record an audiobook, because it was 2 weeks in the studio, 4 hours every day, and I would come home from each and every one of those sessions and just collapse on the bed and just sleep for the afternoon, because it's not just reading, it is genuinely performing. So it's like doing 4 hours on stage every single day, because you have to embody those characters. And I have no idea how Stig was able to bring so much to it in light of my own performance in the all of it. But it certainly, I think, has it's helped me respect what an art form it is to be a voice artist.
There are fascinating insights about audiobooks as well. You are the first author we've had as part of this series who's written a novel that's audiobook only, and I know it may have another life, but I wanted to, when I hear a lot of people talk about reading now, they say, well, I'm very time poor, or I'm exercising, or I'm on the train, or I'm cleaning the house, and that's when I read by listening. And I wondered, you talk about writing the book and listening back to it, what it's like for us to read a story by having it told to us, not by being able to read it ourselves.
Yeah, it's so... I tend to find that people are really polarized on audiobooks. They either really, really love them, or they just, they don't get them, or they just don't click with them.
Well, they don't think of it as reading.
That's true, which I think is such a shame, because it's just as valid. It's reading plus performance. You're not taking anything away. You're just adding an extra layer, I think. I cannot actually read books at the moment. Something broke in my brain about a year ago because I spend so much time writing screenplays and new novels and whatnot. I just cannot look at anybody else's words on the page these days. I've had to turn away a lot of advanced reader copies and a lot of endorsement reads and stuff because none of those come as audiobooks, and audiobooks is more or less the only way these days that I can actually consume books. I hope that changes, because I really miss holding books and I really miss smelling them, and just the
we
weight
talked about this
of them.
before. Cadance also smells books. She's one of those.
Yes, I'm one of those. I walk into a bookshop and just go. So yeah, I love the smell of books. Love it.
But the experience of reading Letters to Our Robot Son for me was that I often hold a book in my hands, and it was very different to be told a story. It took me back to some other state.
It's something primal about it, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like when you're young.
Yeah. A lot of this story, most of the story is set in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, which is a place that you spent time to familiarise yourself with that land. I wanted to ask you why it's important, why you think it's important, why you feel it's important to set stories on the land in this country.
Oh, it's so important. I'm a kinesthetic writer. I need to be in the places that I'm writing. I need to experience them, touch them, feel them. So for Letters to Our Robot Son, I spent 5 weeks in the Blue Mountains. I was the artist in residence at Mount Wilson. I adore Mount Wilson. It's just stolen my heart, that community. And I want my readers in turn to visit those locations. I was 6 months late in turning the book in because I just couldn't make the third act click the way that I wanted it to. It was originally set in Hyde Park, the third act. And then suddenly one day I walked into the new gallery next to the New South Wales Art Gallery, and I wept. The second I was there, I realised that this was the place that I was looking for, and that this was a place that I wanted others to have a spark of imagination in. I very, very, very much want my readers to feel like the stories are alive around them, and I want to reflect Australia. I am so sick of the Americanization of storytelling and how well we know American stories and American locations. I feel like I know New York. I feel like I know Chicago and Philadelphia. Philadelphia in particular. I love It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And so I feel like in many ways, I feel like I know these places better than I know places in Australia. Yes. And I think that is such a tremendous shame, because not only do we not see our own world reflected to us, which is really, really important, I think it caps our imaginations, because it says, well, nobody else is telling stories here. Why should I? I don't know how many people in television, their goal is just to get to LA. Like, once you've made it to LA, you've made it. I couldn't think of anything more horrendous, because I think that this is the place that I want to tell stories in. Now, inevitably, I get dragged over that way, but I want a whole generation of children to grow up being able to read stories set in Australia and set around Australia. I want them to be able to feel like they, in turn, can tell stories because in their own country, because otherwise we're disenfranchising people. We're telling them that you are not the person that can tell this story because this place doesn't tell stories. And so that's why it's so important for me. I think it's also quite simply geospatial memory. I think geospatial memory is the most powerful form of memory. I think when you go to a new place and you're forced to experience it, like being here, this is my first time at the Petersham Bowling Club. It's gorgeous, by the way. There are no pokies. They used to be here, apparently. I love that. That is so good. And so because I have been forced to walk through the dark and, to come up through the side there, which is even darker, and to come on in here to this new place and see all these new faces, there are connections being made in my brain that will never be made if I was just sitting at home on the lounge watching television or even reading or listening to a book. I think that this is the most powerful form of memory, and I think it translates to storytelling as well. Because sure, we're using our imagination when we're interpreting somebody else's version of a location, but I still think it makes stronger connections, it makes stronger links in the mind. And so that's why location is so important for me, and in particular Australian locations.
It's a beautiful way of describing it. When I flagged to you that I wanted to speak with you about some of your film and TV projects, and I want to sort of move on to some of those now, Cadance very kindly sent me an email to help me just get across the project she's working on. Get ready. There are 4 screen projects that she's either consultant or co-creator or screenwriter on. Then there are another 4 feature film projects that she's working on, 3 of which are virtual reality projects, which are kind of pioneering technology. There's also 4 literary projects at the same time as well, a YA novel, a follow-up memoir that we talked about, a neo-noir thriller, and another surreal fantasy polemic. I mean, you are prolific. You have 57 things going on at the same time. But I wanted to ask you, with film and TV projects, some of that work began as you being invited in as a consultant or a script reader. What were you being asked to consult on?
That's a great question. I would just quickly say that they're doing a million projects at once. I had the great fortune to have breakfast with a man named Tony Ayres. He is a living legend in the film and television industry.
He really is.
Isn't he the most gorgeous human being? And I asked him a question. I said, Tony, I've got all these ideas. Which one should I prioritize? Which one should I do? And he said, all of them. Just do them all at the same time, see what sticks. And so that is ultimately what led down that path, because I used to just obsess about the one story at a time, but now I've got 16 or 20, I don't even know how many. So what was the question?
So when you were first being invited into TV to be a script consultant, I asked you what you were being asked to consult on.
Initially it was because I'm transgender, and because finally, thank goodness, you cannot make stories without including the communities that you're making the stories about. When I grew up, my role models now keep in mind I had no idea I was transgender until about 6 years ago. I just knew that I was wrong. I knew that there was something that was foul and indecent about me. And so my role models growing up for gender dysphoria were movies like Ace Ventura, Silence of the Lambs, in which the protagonist is a serial killer that turns women's skin into suits. So these were my role models. And even the good stories, like Hilary Swank winning the Oscar for Boys Don't Cry, when you make stories without involving the communities, when those stories are being told without involving those people, you're doing a disservice, not just to the communities, but also to the audiences, because you're not displaying authenticity. You were just taking the most salacious, you were taking the sexiest, the most dramatic, and what that is doing, that is amplifying in the minds of those kids, people like me, who stayed in the closet and who didn't sort their shit out because I had ingested so many negative stories. I still remember The Simpsons. There was an episode of The Simpsons in which Bart put his red hat in the wash with Homer's white work shirt at the nuclear power plant. Peter Dutton would be very proud. And so it turned his shirt pink. And he was sent to a mental asylum where he met Michael Jackson, of all people. But that was considered crazy. For a man to work at a nuclear power plant and wear a pink shirt. That's all it took.
Yeah.
He wasn't identifying in any way. He was simply wearing the colour pink. So this was the sort of messaging that I got growing up. And it was ultimately very, very toxic. And so initially I was invited into rooms just to sort of be there, to essentially rub a stamp. And that isn't any better. That's just making the creators of these things feel better about themselves because, we've chucked the trans in the corner. Fortunately, that's all changed. I've had the great pleasure of working with a number of production companies who realize that once you actually bring the people in from those communities, not only are you buying yourself a degree of cancellation insurance, as they like to say, you're also getting the authenticity for free. That just comes by simple virtue of my lived experience. I can add so much depth to the stories by being in those rooms. One of the shows that I'm working on, I can't give out too many details about it, but it's a show for Netflix. And it has completely changed the model because this wasn't just me coming in for 2 or 3 days and reading the scripts and going, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't say that. I have been involved in that show since the very, very beginning. Now, I'm not writing an episode. They already had their writers. But I have been in every single writer's room. I sit in on the production meetings. They've paid me tens of thousands of dollars to be there and to add that authenticity. And so not only has that helped bring me up through the ranks of television, it's also added immense value to the project as well. So Netflix really should be applauded for doing that because it's a whole new model. I think it's win-win for everybody. It's a better story, it helps the communities, and it also helps those marginalised artists at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds almost like a kind of an ad hoc attachment for you.
Yeah,
kind of a form of also
like
learning about the industry and coming up, which is it's very hard in a lot of industries. Film and publishing are two, where they want an increase of more diverse perspectives and voices and people, and they don't quite know how to bring them in.
Yes, very much so.
This is kind of like a sideways way of doing that.
Yes, it was effectively let me shadow. I shouldn't name names. I always get in trouble for doing this, but I've had the great pleasure of seeing the showrunner of this show. It's her baby. She's been thinking about it for years and years and years. It's all set around Mudgee-Golgong, and it's got a trans protagonist, so I was made for this show. And seeing the way that she works and how much space she holds for people as well has ultimately helped inform the type of storyteller I am today, and also the energy that I bring to rooms and the space that I try to hold for other people as well. She's been an incredible role model.
You made a joke a moment ago about it's like cancel insurance. And when we were speaking before tonight's event, you said, look, I don't come into these rooms with my cancel hammer, which I thought was a fabulous phrase, the cancel hammer. But I did want to ask you, we are in this enormous wave in Australia. We picked up cancel culture from the US, and whatever they put down, we have picked up with such a fervour. And I wondered whether cancel culture has made it harder for people like you to bring lived experience to the rooms or into these rooms, or whether there are producers who are trying to push back because it's more work for them, or it's something else they didn't think they had to think about. There is,
I have seen a number of people's nose get out of joint. You will feel the pressure from them. My friend Chin Chin has just released an incredible memoir called Model Minority Gone Rogue. She published it with Hachette. It's a great title, isn't it? And she talks a lot about the pressure. So she's from China, and she talks about the pressure that was on her to not fuck up. Because when you were given access to these spaces, when you were given these jobs, when you were given these titles, you are very crucially aware of how lucky you are. And it is an enormous amount of pressure to be under. And some people, not a lot of people, but some people see it as we're getting a free ride, we're getting a free ticket on the Diversity Express. And what they don't realise is that we are bringing all of the baggage and all the things we had to overcome, including their bullshit, Every time we step into that room, it's not like we've gotten through that. It's not like we're over that. It's simply that we've gotten good enough at being able to live with it, and we can also be artists at the same time. But I think a lot of people think of us as queue jumpers. Whereas me, I've been telling stories and I've been writing novels since I was little. I was one of those crazy kids that would give kids out on the playground, like, oh, I've written this novel. Do you want to read it? No, I didn't want to read your last one. I want to read this one. And so that's how long I've been at it. Ever since I was tiny, this is all I've wanted to do, was to tell stories. And so to reduce it just to my gender identity and the idea that I'm getting a free ride, if I didn't have gender dysphoria in the first instance, if it didn't hold me back so long, I think I would have achieved all of this stuff much, much, much sooner. So all it is doing is balancing the scales. But there are some people that don't see it that way, and they do make your life difficult, and you do feel that pressure not to fuck up. You want to be that model minority because you're the lucky one that has managed to land in this space. You don't want a producer to go, well, I'm never hiring another trans consultant or another trans writer ever
It's all
again.
on you.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
It's an interesting phrase you use about the queue jumping, being seen in the arts world as sort of skipping ahead in the line, and it's a really interesting mindset. There's the kind of the tall poppy syndrome that we all know and are familiar with, and it has a particular application in the arts. And more in Australia, we're seeing, screenwriters and filmmakers and actors who get big not because they wanted to big note themselves, which is the way that tall poppy syndrome used to function, that we cut people down to size if they got too big for their boots. But often when the market or when audiences or when readers love them, we're still going, well, that's not unacceptable. But the notion of queue jumping sort of is connected to this mindset of sort of scarcity, that there's just not enough creativity to go around, that if they're creative, you can't also be creative. And you said to me on the way in here tonight, you said in the Australian arts industry, particularly in the kind of film and TV and writing industries, you said that we play poker, but we should be playing blackjack. Can you explain what you mean?
Yes, I can. What I would say about creativity first is a wonderful, wonderful quote from Maya Angelou that I always try to remind myself and other people of, that you don't use up creativity. The more creativity you use, the more there is. It really is that simple. It's not finite. It's not a scarce thing. But I think what really does it is making a living being a creative person. I think that's what creates the perception of scarcity. And what I noticed when I first released my memoir was that you tend to have a cohort, like with your first book, because you're at the writers' festivals and the readers' festivals, and you're backstage at the green room, and all of a sudden Tim Winton comes walking through, and your butt just puckers up. Like, you're like, oh my God, that's Tim Winton. And suddenly there's Jane Harper, and you're like, and so you tend to find your cohort. You tend to find those people who are first releasing their books. And what I had noticed was that far too many people saw us as being in competition. The way that I view it is that we aren't playing poker. We're not trying to take one another's chips. We aren't competing against one another. We're playing blackjack. We are actually trying to beat the house. We are trying to beat the market. Unfortunately, I don't think that mentality is one that is very shared by other artists, particularly post-pandemic, because it has become that much harder to be an artist since 2020. I still remember one of the first festivals I went to. I was at the Newcastle Writers Festival last year, and I'd done a panel with this author, and it was her first memoir. It was my first book. And I was talking to her at breakfast the next day, and she knew all of the authors in the room. She had a sense for how many copies of books that they'd sold. She was ranking them so that she could try to get endorsements from them and try to help them. And we were in conversation, and then all of a sudden somebody walked past and she went, oh, that's so-and-so. He's sold 47,000 books, see ya. And just walked, mid-conversation, walked away from me to try to get that endorsement. And I just do not see it that way. I think that it takes the fun out of it. It takes the joy out of being an artist if you reduce it purely to numbers and if you try to think about crawling over people to get ahead. So that's why I think that, we're playing blackjack, we're not playing poker.
That's a wonderful way of describing it. I wanted to ask you quickly, before we throw open to the questions from the audience, we did mention that you do these amazing visual, the virtual reality projects. What do they entail? Like when I think of VR, I think, as you said to me before, of like putting like a loaf of bread on my head and seeing some other world. How does VR work? It's just me. Comes from Katie. How does VR work with storytelling? What are the kinds of projects you're getting into and where might they kind of take us?
This is going to be the most unsatisfying answer ever.
Okay.
We don't know. I think that's what's so exciting about it. I'll say two things about virtual reality. The first is that it is an empathy engine. That, I think, is what I see as being the maximum potential for virtual reality, because you were literally looking through another's eyes. When we're looking at television, when we're looking at movies, we're looking at a fixed frame that people have put so much effort and energy into perfecting. But in virtual reality, you have to self-direct. You have to choose what it is that you're looking at. I did an experience recently that was in a Syrian refugee camp, and it was astonishing because I'd seen photos before. We've all seen photos. And if anything, we're desensitized to those types of photos because we've seen so many of them, and, we can only hold so much in our hearts. It's okay to let some of it go. But suddenly, I was there. I was in this camp. I did not know how much barbed wire was in these camps. I didn't know how much mud and how much water was in these camps. And the experience, it still haunts me. It's only been a week or so since I've seen it, I think. But I can't stop thinking about it. So that is the first thing that I think that virtual reality has gotten such a bad rap because it's a technology that was always coming. It's going to be here next year. It's going to be here next year. And I think that it gets a real futuristic sci-fi sort of a vibe with it. But where the technology is at now, particularly with the Apple Vision Pro and some of the new systems that are in development, it's so lifelike that it is like looking through somebody else's eyes. And that's where we're headed. The other place that we're headed is that we're not going to be wearing loaves of bread too much longer. Thank goodness. They're heavy and they get hot. But by 2035, this is what virtual reality will be. I'm not so sure that these will still exist in 11 years. I think that we are moving towards this, for good and bad. If you think about how it is that we consume television, how we consume a lot of modern media today, we're sitting on our lounges and we're tapping away on these things. We're so distracted. That's why I love going to a cinema. It's my church, because you put these away for the duration.
Well, you do.
If you're good.
Yeah, exactly.
And so basically, people can be so distracted. They can be distracted by ads. They can be distracted by their phones. But the bad of it is that once you've got these glasses on, that is your entire world. Whatever company it is that has those glasses, has those ads in those glasses, they're going to completely own your world. So that's the bad of it. The good of it, though, is when AI and VR come together, you're going to be able to put on these glasses and walk around a block in Sydney and say, show me what it looked like in 1929. And you will see an overlay around your world that has been simulated by AI that will let you move through time. It will draw on all the information, all the data that we have in catalogues, and way too much information for a human brain to process as a two-dimensional file. And it's going to generate a whole new reality, a whole new world around us. And at the end of the day, the thing that I think is most important is the empathy of it. It's not the shininess, it's not the fun, it's not the 3D, the spikes coming at you and being on a roller coaster and that sort of stuff. Sure, that'll help sell the technology, but it's really going to be the human-to-human connection. We don't have one eye, we have two. We were always meant to see the world in 3 dimensions. And I think that adding that extra layer of truth, adding that extra layer of depth brings with it empathy. And that's why I'm excited about that format.
You got me interested and excited now a bit too.
Good.
I think it's a good moment to hear from our lovely audience. So we're going to turn these house lights back on. Thank you. If anyone has a question for Katie, we'd love to hear from you.
It's always tricky being the first person, but they're the ones I think are the bravest.
Someone has a
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind. You've been so eloquent and so generous tonight. Thank you so much for speaking. I have a question about your writing process. So I really enjoyed when you were talking about oral forms of storytelling meeting written forms and the dance, if you like, between those two forms in our life right now. When you're creating and you're writing, do you ever feel a resistance between oral storytelling and script and screenplay and the sort of unspoken voice or monologue that seems to drive prose writing at all? Do they clash in you, or do they just seamlessly come together?
That is such a cool question. I love it. The point at which they merge is voice. I think that one of my strengths is being able to very quickly get to the essence of a character. I think I'm a really, really strong world builder. It's because I'm able to capture the voice of a character. And I think that that's the intersection right there. When I can sense the essence, when I can feel the essence and carry the essence of a character, I will know how they will respond to a particular situation. And that gets amplified and reflected as the voice of that character. I think that that's what drives me, and that's what I'm always trying to get to. And I think any good story manages to really quickly capture that voice, because otherwise your characters start becoming too samey, they just become vessels for exposition at the end of the day. Without that voice, without being able to really enrich those characters, it just becomes text on a page. And so I think that's it. I think it's not just about me trying to answer, why are you haunting me? Why are you in my heart? It's also about me trying to reflect the way that character sees the world. And so I think voice is the common denominator there. Yeah.
Lovely.
I hope that was such a great question. I hope I've given it a good answer. That's a really good one. I'll be thinking about that one for days.
I have a question.
Oh, Haley has a question. Thank you.
I've got a question. You were just talking about how one of your strengths is world building. Would you attribute that to your experience as a trans person, having to, I guess, imagine what it would be like to live as yourself without living as yourself for so long? Do you think that comes from there?
Oh, wow. Gosh, these are great questions.
But also, just so you know, these guys are also staff members. This is the level of.
This is also the first time we've ever asked a question, actually.
You were right about this story. This place is
I'm not
fantastic.
joking.
This is not just any time.
Wow, what a question. I am not exclusively my transness. That is only a very small part of me, but I think you are onto something all the same, because I have always felt like an outsider my entire life. I still do. I still do. I always felt like I was watching the world from the sidelines, that it was other people's space and I was just around the periphery. And so I think that does necessitate a certain amount of, well, first of all, observing and studying the world and trying to figure out the patterns of people, and just like my character Arto in Letters to Our Robot Son, mimicry, trying to do the sorts of things that I would think that were expected of me, or aping those things. But at a certain point, everybody needs to control their life and they need to control their world. And if you are disempowered, fantasy is the way to do that. Imagination is the way to do that. I'd never really thought about it before. Gosh, you two are giving me homework.
There's another book there somewhere.
I definitely think that is part of it for sure. It's not so much my transness. It's more what gender dysphoria forced me to do to survive. I think that it pushed me to the periphery. Any queer person in this audience tonight will have some idea of what I'm talking about, I think, is that we often feel like we're on the outside looking in. I think you're onto something. I don't think it's a totality, but I definitely think that it's a spark. Yeah. What a great question. Thank you.
Beautiful question.
That's 2 from 2.
I know. We've got time for 1 or 2 more. I know. Other questions? Yeah, Kath in the middle. Thanks.
What you got?
I know.
Exactly. No pressure.
So much pressure now. You talked about the characters coming to you as ghosts, and then you're sort of trying to work out why they're here. How does that process work? Does it work straight away in the writing? Are you just going straight? Because you also talked about trying to track the emotions. So I'm just wondering, do you sit with the characters for a while, or do you really learn about them from the words that you're writing about them?
Another fantastic question. Wow. Initially, definitely not from the words. Yeah, initially, the process of finding the story, the process of mining the story and of filtering it out, it's for me at least, it's very much a messy process that just involves a lot of daydreaming. Daydreaming is so underrated. Boredom is so underrated, I think. And so initially it's a very private marination. It's just me thinking over and over and over again. I think that at a certain point it clicks, and that's when I go, okay, I know you, I know who you are. And then I actually get to the writing, gets all thrown out the window. Because here suddenly the characters are doing the things that I had never imagined. It's just an act of serendipity. It's because we've danced together for so long and because I've questioned them for so long that when I finally give them the freedom to run, they surprise me. And it is a delightful thing, an absolutely delightful thing to happen. I just finished, back in April, I finished writing a novel. I gave myself a challenge to write one in 21 days. And so it's the only novel I've ever gone in with absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of what it was that I was writing. I wrote a line and then I wrote another line and I just kept going. It's called Shazza Slays a Dragon. And it's a fantasy polemic. It's just getting my frustration out about housing and violence against women and all these things. That is the first time I think I've ever actually just purely discovered along the way. I enjoyed it immensely, but it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And I'm not so sure that I would do it. I'll do it again, but probably not too often. But generally, I tend to carry these characters around for a long time. There's a fantastic book. I would call it life-changing. I listened to it earlier in the year, and you know how sometimes you find a book when you really need to find a book? It comes to you. It's like a bloody cat. The cat finds you.
Like the cat here.
Is there a cat here?
There's a cat that adopted the club. Yeah. Chippy.
Oh, Chippy. I want to meet Chippy before I go. I hope Chippy
I
comes.
digress with Chippy, but yeah.
There was a little cat with a blue collar that came to me on the train station on the way here tonight, actually, which, so that's a good omen. But, yeah. Thank you so much for the question. That was fantastic.
Is there one more question for Katie? I've got other things to ask.
So what was that book? Yeah.
Oh my God, I never actually finished it.
We digressed about cats. I'm sorry.
Yeah, is Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. You're familiar with it? Yeah, fantastic.
Actually, it's the only book I've listened to.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's a great one because it's got the gong every now and then, yeah. I listened to it as well. That book gave me permission to be an artist. Like, I've always been one. But I think that I always thought of it as the thing that I was doing when I wasn't being an adult. It was always the thing that was on the side. It was always my passion thing. One day I'd make enough money to be able to do it full time, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't work that way. You have to steal the time. It's the only way that it does work. And Rick Rubin's book, it helped me realize that the process of mining the world and understanding your reality and looking at, all these different things, it's such an intimate process, and it's something that you must imbue with immense respect. You must be receptive, because if you're not, you tend to just self-censor. You tend to get an idea and just go, nah, what am I going to do with that? Rick Rubin got me looking at the world very, very differently. And the way that I actually explore and study my characters, and the way that I capture, for example, my thoughts, the way that I organise them in documents and stuff, all of that's changed to encourage a state of flow. I try to always stay in a state of flow. I can't always, because there are demands of us that people have, and their expectations, there are bills to pay, and all that sort of jazz. But as much as possible these days, I try to stay in that childlike state of awe, where I see a sunset. Like, I've seen so many of them. I've seen thousands of them in my life, and yet one of them just has a particular colour or a particular cloud, or the trees are just a particular way. And when you allow yourself to really feel that, and to feel the gratitude of being able to be in that moment and observing it, and when you start to extrapolate and go, okay, great, what can I do with this? Where can I take this? I think that it's reinvigorated not just who I am as an artist, but also the way that I see the world. And so, yeah, I would consider that book to be incredibly life-changing. Cannot recommend it enough for anybody that has doubts as an artist, or who has doubts as a creative. But I think it's also informed to some extent, coming back to your question, how it is that I mine those characters and how it is that I come to understand them. I have a lot more empathy now for my process. I realise that this weirdness that I've had ever since I was a kid, it's not going away. I just need to give it the love, and I need to give it the space, and the good things will follow. And I haven't been this productive in my entire life. I'm getting so much more work done because I've finally relented. I've given in. I'm poorer than I've ever been. I'm terrified. But I can't think of anything better to do with my life. In fact, I just don't want to do anything else with my life. And that's just how it is.
One of the first conversations I ever had with Katie a few years ago was for a panel on representation on the page. How do we start to see ourselves on the page? Especially people who are from other communities, or misunderstood, misrepresented, more diverse communities, or diverse communities. And you said to me, I can't come in and hit people over the head with my lived experience. I can't come in and lecture people. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get them to see how the world's been for me, or how the world could be for me, or how I want the world to be by doing that. I have to make really great art and invite them in, and then they don't want to leave. And that is what Cadance Bell does. That is what Cadance Bell does. And you said to me before tonight, we need brilliant minds with cool heads to storify the world, to turn the world's problems and ideas into stories. And I really feel like that's what your work does. Thank you so much for tonight's conversation. Thank you for your beautiful responses. Thank you all for being here. Please join me in thanking Cadance Bell.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Michaela. You are the most extraordinary interviewer. Yes. Wow. Can we have a round of applause for Michaela? Thank you. Thank you.
And obviously there are books at the back. Have a drink. Say hi to Chippy. Say hi to Katie first.
I have to find this cat. And can I just say one thing really quickly?
Sure.
Because I'm stealing this from another author that I saw in a panel recently. In France, they do not give chocolate. They do not give wine as gifts. They give books. So if you're not buying for yourself, consider buying for somebody else tonight.
Absolutely, absolutely. And next month, July, James Bradley talking about the deep ocean. It's called Deep Water. So we hope to see you there. Tell your friends, and we'll see you in July. Thanks so much.
That's amazing.